everyone, my name is Elise. Welcome back to my channel. I hope you're all doing so good today. We are here to do my December wrap up, the last wrap up of 2023, even though we are now currently in 2024. But I had a great reading month in December. I loved almost everything that I read. I think there were only 2 books that I felt so about, but nothing that I hated and lots that I loved, so that's always a win. I also had 2 of these books show up in my best books of the year video. Very exciting, and that's why I love waiting until the end of the year to do that video, because I'm always hopeful that I'll squeeze a few more in. It does tend to be a time for me when I try to pick up books that I think might make it into my best books of the year. It definitely worked out this way. That was lovely. And like always, we're going to get into the books in the order that I read them. I think I have 9 books that we'll be talking about, if I'm doing the math correctly. And we'll go ahead and start with the first book, and that is Split Tooth by Tanya Tagaq. This is published by Penguin. I do know that this is has recently or will be soon getting published in the UK by And Other Stories. This I read via audio and the physical book at the same time, and I would recommend that experience with a couple caveats, and I'll get into that in a second. But this book is about a young woman / girl. She's like in her teenage years, I think, maybe even a little younger. Maybe she is a girl. And she is growing up in the 1970s. She is Indigenous to Canada, has a pretty challenging life. There's a lot of abusive family members. She is struggling with addiction. There's a lot of poverty going on. Lots of trigger warnings, I would say, to definitely look up in this. And she eventually becomes pregnant, and that has consequences that we get to see played out. There's also a lot of experiences of her interacting with different spirit entities, and that was really interesting as well. And this book has an exploratory format. So one, there's illustrations throughout the book. Then there's also more traditional prose. And in some sections, there is poetry. So let me show you some of that as well. So the physical experience, I think, is worthwhile because you get the illustrations. You also get to see the poetry and some of the spacing, but the audio experience is read by the author, and they do a wonderful job narrating it. The one thing with this book is it is extremely horrific and hard to read. Definitely look up the trigger warnings. I almost had to set this down multiple times because I was getting so overwhelmed with it. And I will say, while I do recommend the audio and physical experience together, because the narrator does such a good job and because you get to see the illustrations, the audio experience is challenging. There is a lot of noises that the narrator is performing, and sometimes they're much more innocuous, and sometimes they have to do with the really difficult subject matter that's getting described, like, for example, sexual assault. So those were the bits that became a little overwhelming for me. So just be aware of that. Be kind to yourself when you're reading it. And if that would be too much for you, maybe stay away from the audio and just do the physical. But yeah, I thought this was a really fascinating read, and you can definitely tell that the author is a poet by nature. And again, they did a great job performing the audio, but very, very hard hitting, really sat heavy with me for a long time. So that is Split Tooth. And then next up, we moved on to something much lighter, which was needed, and that is the next in the Sherlock Holmes series. This is The Hound of the Baskervilles by Arthur Conan Doyle, and this is the 5th in publication order in that series, and it is a novel. This is maybe the most well-known of his stories, I think, and I really enjoyed it. I think it's my favorite of the novels so far. This takes place in the countryside. Watson and Holmes are investigating a murder and a curse in this one that has to do with the Baskerville family and how some of their descendants are getting murdered. This one is really Watson heavy, and I do have a whole vlog that will be coming out specifically on this book, as I do with these books. So that will come up at some point. I don't know when. It's all filmed, but I haven't edited it. So look for that when it comes and you'll hear a little bit more about this. But I do think this is a really good entry point into the Sherlock Holmes series if you're interested in starting somewhere but don't care about reading them in publication order, which you don't need to do. I think, yeah, this is a great one to start out with and very fun. So that is The Hound of the Baskervilles. And I have the headline editions, I should say. Next up, we have the first book in the Narnia series. This is my partner's collection. They have all of them bound up together, and every year he gets to pick a book that I read. And this year he originally wanted me to read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and that's what I was planning to do. But this collection has The Magician's Nephew going first. Now, The Magician's Nephew got published after the rest of the series got published, but chronologically takes place before The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. So he switched to having me read The Magician's Nephew first, so that's the one that I read. This edition has great illustrations. So there's the title page of The Magician's Nephew. And this was so fun. I've never read any of the Narnia books before, but The Magician's Nephew really sets up the story of Narnia. It gives you some good world building on how people can travel between worlds. It sets up the character of Aslan, who is the lion, and I have seen the movie, so I do know about it, but the tone of this book was so much funnier than I was imagining it to be. I also listened to this on audio while reading it physically, and this one, the narrator was so fun. It's very sarcastic and wry, and I really enjoyed that. The main character, who is a boy, I think his name is Diggory or something like that, is so intelligent for his age. It's almost farcical, the language that he's using, which I thought was absolutely hilarious. And yeah, this was just really, really fun. I'm excited to get to The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, which is the one my partner has asked me to read for 2024. So I'm going to try and get to it in January at some point. And yeah, really looking forward to that because I know that's a lot of people's favorite in this series. And who knows if I'll continue on from there, but I will definitely read that one and I'm looking forward to it. So that is The Magician's Nephew. And I guess I should say this, I think this collection is done by HarperCollins. All right, next up we have, oh, I might have actually read before The Magician's Nephew, my bad. So this is A Merry Little Meet Cute by Julie Murphy and Sierra Simone, and it's published by Avon. And it is a romance book that takes place in and around Christmas. And in the last part of the year in 2023, I definitely got back into my romance reading. I realized I hadn't read any the entire year. And then in October, November, and December, I tried to read like 1 or 2 a month. So this is the one I got to in December. And I overall really enjoyed this. There were some things I didn't like about it, but in the end, those felt more minor to me than the things I enjoyed about it. The premise of this book follows Bee, or Bianca von Honey, which is her stage name, and she has a very successful career as an adult film performer, and she ends up getting cast in this Hallmark-esque movie, which is very PG, very kind of intertwining with purity culture, and she's cast alongside her co-star named Nolan, who is a former boy band member that had a fall from grace. He had a bad boy reputation, and he's trying to start a new, like, reformed career because he desperately needs money to take care of his family. So they are the unlikely duo starring in this new Hallmark-like film, and most of the world and most of the people in the production don't know that Bee is an adult film star, and that would be a big no-no if anyone found out, so it's a secret. But Nolan knows because he is a fan. that's some of the premise and how some of the tension builds over time in the novel. And the sex positive representation was so good in this. We love to see it. It also has fat representation in a main character, which again, we love to see it. The steam was written very well. I very much enjoyed those parts of the novel. Sometimes they can be really cringy, but this I liked. And this is also slightly more like experimental than what you normally get. Like, I think sometimes you get like very, very vanilla sex, and that's not a bad thing, but sometimes that's like all you get. And like, we could use a little more variety in the romance world. So it was nice to have that represented here. And the story was very festive. It made sense. There weren't too many like plot holes or anything like that. So I really enjoyed this overall. The things that I didn't love about it are, one, the first chapter. The first chapter has got to go. It is so info dumpy, and I don't like it when books do that, because it's like, we're smart enough to like figure some of this out on our own, and we didn't need all of that in one chapter up front. You could have dispersed that throughout the book and it would have been fine. So that first chapter was a little oof, and push through it if that concerns you when you pick it up. The other thing is, this is a dual POV novel, so you're getting both Bee and Nolan's perspectives, and I don't know how this author duo split up the writing. If they split it up by one of them writing a POV and the other one writing the other POV, then one of the POVs was definitely stronger than the other. I thought Nolan's POV was so much stronger. I thought it was better written, and I thought his character was overall more interesting than Bee's, which is sad because I think Bee could have been just as equally interesting. I just don't think she got, I don't know, what that character deserved maybe. And I just kept wanting to go back to Nolan's chapters. So if anybody knows how the writer duo split it up, let me know, because if someone wrote Nolan's, I want to read more of what they have written because it was very good. So that was the other thing that I disliked. The third thing that I didn't like about it is the third act conflict. I think there were like a couple pieces of it and it went on too long. So at the end, we had like a third act conflict, and then there was like another 100 pages that included a secondary form of conflict. It was just too much. I feel like that needed to be shortened down, and we didn't need all of the conflict that we got. But overall, I still really enjoyed this and would highly recommend it to you if you're looking for any type of a Christmas romance book. It's great. All right, next up we have The Secret Lives of Church Ladies by Deesha Philyaw. This is published by West Virginia University Press, and I adored this book, as most everyone has. It is a short story collection that's very slice of life, and it's following Black women and sometimes young women, sometimes older women, and the ways that they are trying to subvert the expectations that people have on them to be nice, to be polite, to be good girls and women. And I love that. That's already set up for me to love from the get-go, but it was incredibly well written. I really liked how dynamic all of the characters were. And this story, the story collection is interlinked in some ways, which I wasn't expecting and didn't know about. And I really enjoyed the reveal of that, of like getting to see in some stories like, oh, this is that person that we heard about in one of the previous ones. They aren't all linked, I don't think, but I really enjoyed that when it came up. My favorite stories in here were JL and Peach Cobbler, which I know a lot of people love Peach Cobbler. I think it's one of the longest stories in here as well, but so great. This is getting adapted into a mini series at some point, and I can't wait to see it. Yeah, the characters were so fascinating, and you get to see them exploring like desire and longing and love, and in a variety of different ways, and I just loved it. So highly recommend. If you haven't read this yet, it's as good as everyone says it is. Definitely pick it up. So that is The Secret Lives of Church Ladies. And next we have a winter thriller that I was able to fit in, and that is The Hunting Party by Lucy Foley. This is published by William Morrow, and it's the second Lucy Foley that I have read. I've also read, what is that one about the wedding on an island, The Guest List, and I enjoyed that as well. This one is about a New Year's reunion that a group of friends that have been friends for a long amount of time go on. And the little tagline on this says, the beautiful one, the golden couple, the volatile one, the new parents, the quiet one, the city boy, the outsider. One of these friends is a murderer and one won't make it out alive. And from the first third of the book, you know that there is a dead body, but they don't reveal who the dead body is. I always find that interesting. And then throughout the novel, you're not only trying to figure out who the murderer is, but you're also trying to figure out who has died. So there's kind of two things that are hidden from you. I will say I did guess who was dead and who killed them pretty early on, but that's okay. I never mind that. In some ways I'm like, okay, yeah, so it made sense what you tried to lay out here, like that all tracked. And I like it when it's more on the believable side than like unbelievable, impossible to solve. So that was very fun. The atmosphere in this was great. It's very snowy. They're isolated in these cabins out in the woods, and the characters all felt different enough from each other that you could keep them separate, which I always appreciate when there's a large cast of characters. So yeah, enjoyed this. Don't think it's the best thriller of all time or anything like that, but I think it's very fun, well-crafted mystery. So if you like that, check out The Hunting Party. And this made me more excited to get to the Paris apartment, which I have because my mother-in-law gave it to me. She also gave me this. So want to get to that one at some point. Next up, we have Death Valley by Melissa Broder, and this is published by Scribner. It was a year of Melissa Broder for me, and I read 3 Melissa Broder books. I read The Pisces, Milk Fed, and Death Valley. Death Valley, I feel like, is a slight departure for her. It feels more mature, and I don't say that in a sense that like it's better or worse. Just the narrator is dealing with themes that I think come along with like being a little bit older in life. She's at this crossroads and kind of having a breakdown because her father is very, very ill. He is in the hospital, and her partner has been chronically ill for a very long time, and she has to care for him in a number of ways. So she goes to California to get away and work on a book. The character is an author. And while she's there, she goes on a hike and finds this cactus. And this cactus ends up being a gateway to another world. That's the setup. And really, that's just the setup so she can have a bunch of philosophical kind of like conversations and thoughts. And I do think some of them were extremely poignant. And there were passages where I was like, man, that feels so relatable and it feels so profound and is an interesting way to look at grief. A lot of this book is talking about grief. It's also talking about some of the ways that we lose ourselves as we get older, or at least it feels like losing ourselves because we're changing, and sometimes it could be hard to look at the like newness of who we're becoming in a positive way. And yeah, I really enjoyed those passages. I do think that some of this was a little bit lacking in like crafting more of a reason why she's having some of these thoughts. It was very like thinly veiled philosophical thoughts as far as the plot goes, but I didn't hate that. It was totally fine, and I enjoyed this overall, and really was deeply moved by some of the passages, and I greatly appreciate that in a book. So enjoyed Death Valley, but it is slightly different than her other stuff, so know that going into it. It's also much shorter than the other things that I've read by her. So it definitely goes by pretty quickly, which I think works for what it's trying to do. So that is Death Valley. And last up, we have another book that made it to my best books of the year, and that is Collected Works by Lydia Sandgren. This is translated by Agnes Broome, and it's published by Astra House. Whew, this book, that I said this in the best books of the year video, but there is so much to potentially talk about with this book, and I'm going to try and talk about some things that I didn't speak on in that other video to spread some of the love for this book. So the premise is you have a past timeline that includes Martin, Cecilia, and Gustav. Martin and Cecilia are a couple, and Gustav is originally Martin's best friend, but they very much start getting integrated as a trio. So you see them in their young adulthood, growing in their careers, trying to learn more about themselves and about life. There's a lot of talk about academia and what it is like to be a creative as a professional. All that's fascinating. And that is all from Martin's perspective. Then in the present timeline, you're getting two perspectives. That is Martin and Rachel. Rachel is Martin and Cecilia's daughter. They also have a son, but you don't get his perspective, but he is present in the novel. And yeah, you're orbiting around this mystery that Cecilia, at some point after she gives birth to her two kids, disappears. She does this intentionally. It's not like a kidnapping or anything like that. She just disappears. You're not sure why. And that's some of the mystery in this book. Now, something that I haven't talked about yet in this book is there's this framing in certain sections where Martin in present day is getting interviewed by some interviewer, we don't know who, about writing and about his works. The interesting thing is through reading the book, you're like, well, but wait, like they keep talking about how he hasn't published anything. There's one short story that he publishes when he's younger, but nothing else. And I thought that was so fascinating to try and parse out, like, what are they interviewing him for? Like, what's going on? And I definitely have a theory for that and how I kind of framed that in my mind throughout the novel. So if you want to talk about that with me, we can talk down below. I also liked the ways that the interview really exemplified some of what was happening in the previous passage that you just read or what was to come in the next passage. I always like when books find ways to imbue additional meaning into what they're writing with some other like framing device, and this book definitely succeeded in that. So highly encourage you to pick this up. There's not a lot of plot, but it still feels very propulsive, and I really enjoyed this. So that is Collected Works. Oh my God, I forgot a book. Okay, so I don't know when I read this in the month. I think I read this pretty early on, but I also read The Possession by Annie Ernaux. That one is translated, it's not by Tanya Leslie, who has done the other ones. It is someone else. I will put it down here. But this one is similar to some of the other stuff I've read by her in the past. And this was the first time where I'm like, maybe I need to take a little bit of a break because some stuff is feeling a little samey. But it is about a relationship that she has with a man that she becomes very infatuated with. So it's really similar to A Simple Passion. I do think it's different men, but I can't quite remember because she just talks about them with a letter. So yeah, I think they're different. And I still really enjoyed it for her writing, as I usually do. It amazes me how objective her work can appear, even though it's nonfiction about her own life, and it's really hard to be objective about yourself. And yeah, she just impresses me with being able to capture a feeling, an intense feeling, in a short amount of time that feels so complicated, but she's really like making an attempt to describe, like, here's what it's like to feel possessed in a specific way. And I love it. It's very evocative. I really enjoy her writing. I like the short form of it. I think it fits really well with what she's trying to do, and would highly recommend her writing. I still think I would point people to Happening first. That's still my favorite by her. But yeah, enjoyed this. We'll definitely read more of her, but I'm going to take a little bit of a break or move to something that isn't about a relationship, so I don't start getting things convoluted in my mind. So yeah, those were the 9 books that I read in December. Please let me know if you have read any of these and what you thought about them, and let me know what your favorite read in December was, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye.